Is it different if you've known someone for a while? If they haven't asked you out in all this time, wouldn't it mean they're not interested and not aligned? I don't remember exactly the context, like what I was saying when you asked that question. It doesn't really matter because I can cover it anyway. Because when you ask the question, you're like, if they haven't asked you out in all this time, wouldn't it mean that they're not interested and not aligned? Let's just look into that a little bit. And thank you so much, because I'm going to illustrate something really profound right now. If you are wanting to explain it away that easily, and I know I'm not only talking to Catherine right now, I'm talking to all of you out there who do these beautiful things, okay? So hear this for yourself too, because I know you're doing some version of this in your life. Is it different if you've known someone for a while? If they haven't asked you out in all this time, wouldn't it mean they're not interested, not aligned? Well, think about it like this. If you're wanting to explain it away that easily, I'm just wanting to explain it away. Oh, they're not interested, they're not aligned. If they were, they would have said or done something by now. Maybe you're right about that, but maybe you aren't. Now, the question we've got to ask ourselves is, what is the secret psychological benefit for being right about that? If they wanted it, they would have already said something. So what's the secret psychological benefit for that? If I'm not right about that, maybe I need to say something. Maybe I need to expose myself. Maybe that makes me vulnerable. It opens me up for rejection, right? So there's so much psychological benefit to just saying, oh, if they wanted it, they would have said something by now. And your fear will often justify your lack of engagement in life by saying things like that. Because I know where this question's coming from right now, Catherine. I'm sitting here delivering this conversation to you, and you're sitting there in your thoughts, and I've told all of you many times today, look at the things you're avoiding in your life, right? And so now what happens for you, Catherine, is you're listening to me say this, and I say, look at the things you're avoiding in your life, and that comes up, and you go, oh, well, I thought about talking to that guy, but that's scary, and so I've been avoiding that. And then what your ego does is it says, well, no, that doesn't count. Because if it counts, he would have said something already, it's been too long, too much time has passed, right? And so what your ego is doing is it's justifying your lack of engagement in life. This is the thing, Catherine, is it doesn't really matter if you're right or wrong about it. Maybe you're right. Maybe they would have said something. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe they wouldn't have said something. But it doesn't really matter, because the juiciest experience in life is not them wanting it or not wanting it, but it's in the moment when you show up to find out if they want it. Like, I want everyone, does everybody get that? Do you really realize that that is the only moment that you're really alive? This whole, oh, he likes me, he worships the ground I walk on, he buys me things, he takes me on trips. That's not really being alive. That's just existing. And look, if you're in a relationship like that and you're happy, I'm not saying that's wrong, but that's not what being alive is really about. It's not about having everything the way you want it and being all content with it. That's not what being alive really is. Being alive are those moments when you don't know if you're gonna get what you want. Like I said earlier, when you're standing out on the skinny branches, when you're feeling that pressure, when you're pushing yourself into unfamiliar territory, when you're nervous, that's when you're alive. And so the reward is not in him wanting it or not. It's not in him asking or not. It's those moments of engagement when you show up and you're invested and your palms are sweaty and you don't know what's going to happen, but you're showing up to find out what's going to happen because you want it enough anyway, right? It's like, I don't know how it's all going to go, but I want it enough to be engaged with it. That's when you're alive. I'm just gonna say this, this is for everybody. If you're not feeling that at least one time every day, you're not really living. You're coasting, you're existing, you're drifting. Being alive is getting out there in those unfamiliar territory, where you're nervous, where you don't know how it's gonna go, where you have to bring forth all your best resources, where sometimes you fall flat on your face and you have to learn something. Sometimes you knock it out of the park and you feel that satisfaction of, oh my God, I nailed it. Sometimes it's mediocre. Sometimes it's fantastic. But being alive is when you're being in the places where you don't always get it right, where it's not always polished and well put together and rehearsed and thought out. To answer your question, Catherine, it doesn't matter if it's different or not. The question is, are you going to find the courage in your own heart to get engaged? Or are you going to let your fear justify your lack of engagement and remain in familiar, comfortable territory and just continue to have life be the same way it's always been? You're not wrong to do that, by the way. You are such a powerful creator that if you want to create that, you can. And there's nothing wrong with that. Research and the data shows that it's just not a fulfilling way to live, right? There's been plenty of studies done on happiness and fulfillment, and the data is there. That's just not the most fulfilling way to live. The irony is this, is that if you lived out on those skinny branches, if you were really engaged and going all out in your life in the scary ways and the challenging ways, the interesting thing is this, is that even if you didn't get everything you want, you would still have a fulfillment. inside of you. Because even if it didn't amount externally to everything you wanted it to, you would know in your heart that you gave it everything you had, right? You would know in your heart that I left it all on the field. So at the end of the day, it's kind of like, well, it worked out or it didn't, but at the end of the day, I know that I brought my absolute best to life. I know that I lived this life with everything that was in my soul to be lived. And so you'll feel fulfilled, even if you don't have all the external things you want. But what I found, and they go hand in hand, is that when you live this way, you tend to get a lot of the external things you want. It's just a natural result of living your life in that way. This is what I want to say. All the things we're afraid of, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, I just want to go back to Catherine's question for 1 second, because you think about all the mental gymnastics we do and all the hoops we have to jump through to avoid having that conversation. And when you think about what are you really protecting yourself from? Somebody saying they're not interested? If you could really understand, for Catherine and for everyone, if you could really understand how insignificant someone's interest in you is, like, oh my God, like of all the things in the world to be concerned about, that is like so far on the bottom of the list. It's like, it is like such an insignificant thing, whether or not someone else is interested in you. And yet in our fear-based thinking, in our survival, control, comfort-based way of living, we have raised someone else's opinion of us all the way up here on like the top of the pedestal. It doesn't belong there. It has no utility there. Like it's not, there's no positive to having it there. There are only negatives to having it there. And it's not true. Like it is one opinion of 7 billion, almost 8 billion. And yet we play this weird mental game where we get fixated on very specific people that we barely know even. And then we give their opinion of us like this ultimate meaning in life. They're just a random person in 8 billion. Why would you do that to yourself? When you go through all these hoops and all these mental gymnastics just to avoid having a conversation with someone and facing a potential rejection, like when you really think about what's the cost of that, so you have a conversation with someone, they reject you, you feel bad for a little while, and then life goes on. And and this is the kind of counterintuitive thing about it, is that if you're really doing the healing work alongside of this, that person's rejection will actually make you feel more worthy. I know that's counterintuitive. A lot of us don't think about it. We think when I get rejected, I feel less worthy. And that's why I spend my whole life avoiding rejections, because I'm trying to feel worthy. Well, that's like the fearful way to approach it. The courageous way to approach it, this is what I shared earlier about my own experiment with rejection. It's that every time you get rejected, you realize fundamentally that nothing has changed about you. You're still here, you're still alive, all is still well, you still have potential and possibility and creativity. You start to realize when you do the healing work alongside of this, that someone else's rejection doesn't actually take anything from you. And you actually become okay with it. It's like when I tell you I am okay with people's rejection, it is so okay with me. Like, I remember a time in my life when it wasn't okay, and it's just such a different way to be alive in the world. To have no kind of energy or no kind of feeling on what other people think about me. Now, look, if people I respect start thinking poorly of me, that's a different story, right? If my wife starts thinking poorly of me, that'll be concerning for me. And I'm gonna wanna know what I did to create that and how I need to heal it. But random people in the world, it's such a different way to live. And I say, like, it is a prerequisite to creating love. This is what a lot of people don't understand, is that all of these things that I'm kind of talking about here, like just a general rejection. Let's just say if you were a door-to-door salesperson, for example, like that's a very general rejection, right? Knocking on people's doors, you're gonna hear 50 no's for every yes you hear. Most people are gonna slam the door in your face, don't even wanna talk to you, right? So you've gotta have some kind of thick skin. But that's like, there's not a lot of intimacy in that, right? It's I'm trying to sell you something, you're not interested in buying, boom. There's not a lot of intimacy in that, right? It's not very vulnerable. But if you can't be comfortable with that level of rejection, then the level of rejection you face in an intimate situation with another person, like a romantic, intimate involvement, it's gonna be impossible. Like, it's not gonna be hard, it's gonna be impossible, because you have to integrate that more surface level of rejection first before you have enough courage to go to that deeper level of rejection. And so this is why I say, like, it literally becomes a ceiling, because if you can't handle the door-to-door salesman kind of rejection, that's a ceiling in your life. It's like a place where your life stops. It can't go higher than that. All of the relationships in your life are only going to be able to go that far, which is a very surface level of rejection. And the moment any relationship in your life goes that far, it's going to collapse, because you don't have the emotional bandwidth to handle it. That's why it's so important to practice out of your comfort zone. I keep talking about this, but it's so important to get practice outside of your comfort zone.